Thank you everybody for coming. As far as the minutes, they are on the back of the agenda that you received when you got here. If you read through them, if there's any corrections or changes, if you'll just let Melissa know, and we can get that changed on the minutes. And then Pat, I don't know if you have a report for us, financial, where we're at.
Well, I can tell you as far as where we were at the last official point in time, which would be the end of August. Now, we've had a lot of things going on between now and then, but we had $840.63 in our checking account. I will report happily, though, that with our event in September and donations and grants coming in, we've had nearly $2,000 worth of donations over the past month or so. So it's been really, really terrific. Thank you to everyone.
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much. We'll have a couple other reports. Ben Bliven on the nominating committee. Captain Ben Bliven.
Good morning, everybody. Almost afternoon. I just have two things. One is the nominating committee. We are in the process of trying to solicit people that are interested in being a part of the board for this organization, for the AOD Partnership. For 2014, we have up to 5 at-large positions that we need to fill, and then we also need a vice chair, which is Bob's role this year. The vice chair is actually a 3-year commitment. It is a vice chair, and then the 2015 you'd be the chair of the partnership, and then 2016 you're the past chair. So if you have an interest in that, please get in touch with me or Bob or Melissa Doddard and let us know that you're interested. If you know somebody who you think may be interested and would be a good fit for the board, please get in touch with one of us and let us know. We do have monthly board meetings, and we do ask the board members to be a part of one of the short-term action teams as well. So there is a little bit of a time commitment, but I think it's a very worthwhile partnership. So. And then the second thing is, I just wanted to let everybody know that we are working on our bylaws for the AOD Partnership. We are working with Ruth Aware on that, so we're hoping by our December meeting we'll have something for everybody to review and look at, and have those up to date and legal and good to go. And I'll just
Bylaw revisions or I'm sorry, I was reading.
Okay.
I'm not listening to you, that's sorry. Francis, sir? There you are. Francis, can you give us a donations update?
I can. So as the board is very aware, and some of you may know, 2014 is going to be the last year of the major grant that funds the AOD Partnership. That said, the work we do is very important to this community, and we want to continue. So we are hoping that we're hoping that you'll help us in 2 ways. One, if you can afford a contribution, we do have envelopes outside. They are tax deductible. We're a 501c3, so that's a charitable nonprofit organization. So you can help us that way. But also, if you would be interested in helping us to work on securing funding for the partnership going forward, please let me know, because we could use your help in both ways.
Thank you, Francis. Melissa, you want to do stats?
To be brief and keep us on schedule, all of you should have a copy of, well, first I need to apologize for not getting an agenda and or minutes out prior to this meeting, so I hope you can forgive. You all have a copy of the stats updates. One thing to point out on that sheet, though I'm not going to go through each one of the stats, is that we have a new stat that we're starting. We're actually looking at developing a online network for those, for parents, for those working with youth, for those concerned about youth, as a way for people to connect, as a resource for the community. So if you're interested in getting involved in that, please, let us know. You have contact information for both Aaron Ruff and myself at the bottom. And also, one thing to point out is that I believe almost every single one of our stats have a meeting coming up. Please take a moment if there's anything in there that you're interested in, whether it's next week or the week following, we've got meetings scheduled. And the online network, if you are interested in that, we do plan on meeting tomorrow at the Health Department from 10:30 to 11:30. So that is kind of some of the volunteer opportunities. As you guys probably saw in the announcements, which we will also post and share after the fact, there's a couple things that probably should be made aware of within those. We'll just pull them up. And this kind of melds into the partner updates as well. This is, you all have information on the back side of the little postcard in front of you on our library series. It's a 4-part series. It's going to take kind of what we've been doing with pushback and dedicating an hour and a half, which will include some question time as well. Offered twice. Please share with the people that you work with. We also have some half-sheet flyers out on the table out here. Please help yourself and take as many as you want. We will be sending this out again through our weekly update. If you haven't received our weekly update, you will start receiving it after this meeting. So then you kind of get in the know on that. On October 26th, we will be taking part in another DEA drug take-back. So if you have any medications in your home, I plead with you, prescription, over-the-counter, pet meds, vitamins, all of it, get it out. We'll take it for free. And this is just the time of the national recognized event, but we do have 5 permanent drop box locations here in Marathon County. That information, again, is out on the table in the hallway. Want you all to make sure you save the date. And on the back of your stat sheet, there are some of these slides. Our next AOD Partnership Meeting on December 3rd will focus on medication abuse. Like Francis said, wherever Francis has gone. We are now able to take online donations. Thank you. And so you have that information as well. 2 last things. The Fly Effect campaign was just launched through the Department of Justice. On the front part of your, or front or back, however you're looking at it now, on your postcard, you just have some examples of some of the materials that are part of that campaign. But I definitely invite you to visit theflyeffect.com. This campaign was launched with teens and young adults in mind. So keep that in mind, share that with the teens and young adults in your life, have them take that journey. And lastly, it's almost lunch, it is lunchtime, let's be honest. And again, this is part of our partner updates. Oh, it's not, I take that back. But we are actually very fortunate to be working with Noodles to do a benefit night with them. And we have posters, we have little like quarter sheets out in the hallway, we've got full-size posters, and we've got this regular 8.5 by 11 size. Please take, when we leave, when you're done here today, take one, put it up where you work, share it with others. We will be sending this out electronically so you can forward it on. But 10% of all the proceeds come back into the AOD Partnership to help support the kind of things that we have going on here today. So that is kind of some stats and partner updates. I want to make sure I introduce Bettina. I don't know where, oh, there she is. That's Bettina. Bettina is our North Central Technical College intern. She's going to be with us to the end of the year, and hopefully she loves us so much she's going to stick around and with us for a while. So Bettina is going to be working with our Youth for Youth group. She's going to be working with our parent network. She's also going to be doing some other things to help support our efforts. And then Andrea Hodek, who I do not believe is here today, she is an AmeriCorps member that is working with the Girl Scouts. She's going to help support our efforts here with the AOD Partnership as well. So I wanted to make sure I highlighted them. And before I do the Backpack Tobacco Act for Destiny, I'm just going to share with you guys one thing that I didn't end up putting out in an update, so this is probably new to some of you. There are 2 open houses coming up. Community Corner Clubhouse is going to have an open house on October 7th through 11th at their location at 319 North 3rd Avenue from 1 to 4. If you want to go in and take a tour of their facility. And I'll have this information, we'll send it out again through the update. But if you want to go check out the Community Corner Clubhouse for Mental Illness Awareness Week, that is available to you. And also, the justice programs here in Marathon County have been doing meet and greets with various offices. And for the next one, held on Thursday, October 10th at 1 in the Branch 2 courtroom in the courthouse, for an hour, they're going to be having a meet and greet for the OWI court. So if you haven't seen it in session, if you want to get more information on OWI court, you're invited to attend that, but you need to RSVP to Laura Yari. And her phone number is 715-261-1191. So that is all what I had. And Destiny, can you share yours, please?
So my name is Destiny Rayton. I've introduced myself way like a year ago, but I work on other tobacco product education within Marathon County. So that includes things like little cigars, cigarillos, the dissolvable tobacco. I do have some sheets out there if you want to learn more about those. And I do education on these things because they're flavored like candy. They're trying to appeal to a youth market to get people addicted to them. They have cheap prices, and then they are packaged like candy. So I try to raise awareness among adults and other people who might be interested in this, and knowing what might be in some of the kids' hands. But one of the things I wanted to point out is that there is a Backpack Tobacco Act that just kind of is right now. It's a bill that's out. They're getting sponsors for it, and in my opinion, some of the things that are good about this bill, it would close the loopholes in the tobacco world. So it would close the tax loopholes. So cigarettes are taxed at a much higher rate than these other tobacco products, and so they're cheaper, which make them more available to youth. And then also they would require all of the tobacco products that are sold in convenience stores and other stores to be behind the counter. Because at this time, cigarettes have to be placed behind the counter, but other tobacco products do not. And so I just wanted to let you know, because in 2011 it was the first time ever that little cigars were sold at a higher rate than cigarettes among youth. So it is something that is a problem, and I just want to let everybody know. There is a lot of information out there that I brought about this act if you'd like to know more about it. The timeline for this is they're looking for co-sponsors for this bill until October 8th, and then hopefully there will be a hearing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And if you didn't have a chance to stop by at the front table or in the hall, there is additional resources that people can grab on all the different subjects that we're talking about today. And we would ask, we're going to have our speakers come in shortly, is that if you do have a question, they're going to save some time at the end, so if you could just write it down, we can get to keep the presentations going and then do the question and answer at the end. The first person that's going to speak to us is Special Agent Ron Glauman. He's with the State of Wisconsin Department of Criminal Investigation. Works here in the Wausau office. He's going to talk about methamphetamine, current trends, some different things that you can look at, what they're seeing now. And then we'll have investigator Dan Boutnick from Langley County Sheriff's Office, who's going to talk about bath salts. And obviously Antigo, has been in the news recently with a lot of the activity they're having, and he's going to speak to that second. But for right now, I'll leave it to Ron.
I've been told I have to put on the lavalier, although you won't need it. I think he needs it to record me. So, as Bob said, my name is Ron Glauman. I'm a special agent with the Wisconsin Department of Justice, Division of Criminal Investigation, which is a fancy way to say that I'm a state narcotics agent. I work under the Attorney General, J.B. Van Hollen. And the Department of Justice, we have a number of offices throughout the state: Milwaukee, Madison, Appleton, Wausau, Eau Claire, and we've got some resident agents up in Vilas County and some in the Superior area. That being said, we focus on a lot of different things. Anytime you see the State Fire Marshal's office in the paper, that's us. That's the Department of Justice. We do homicide investigations, a lot of internet crimes against children. The AG's push right now is human trafficking. And then, of course, we work drugs and some other things. And I work drugs. I've been with DOJ for 22 years. All I pretty much focused on during that entire time are drug investigations, ranging everywhere from marijuana, cocaine, meth, heroin, anything and everything that you can imagine as far as dope that I've done investigations on. What we're going to talk about today, and Melissa gave me the assignment to pursue and explain what methamphetamine is, how it's used, its effects, and touch on manufacturing in about 20 minutes. Ready, go. Okay. So what is methamphetamine? It is a Schedule II controlled substance that affects the neurotransmitter, primarily dopamine, in the body. And I'm going to talk a lot about dopamine because I think one of the things for us to understand, I could show you all sorts of pictures about labs and all sorts of stuff. And we'll talk about labs, but one of the things that I think we have to understand about the impact of it on individuals and people is how it really affects the body. And I will talk about it from one side of it. I am not a treatment provider. That's not my area of focus or expertise. I often joke that I am much less about rehabilitation. I'm much more about incarceration. But that's just because I'm on the CJ side of things and work as law enforcement. Dopamine is really sort of an interesting thing, and we're going to talk a lot about it. But let's throw sort of a broad brush over methamphetamine trends. And some of this will give you insight as we talk through this. But one of the big things that has sort of come about ever since pseudoephedrine, which is the primary precursor in the manufacture of meth, we all know now that when you want to get your Sudafed, you have to show your ID, you have to buy it from behind the counter, and that's because it is the primary precursor in the manufacture of meth. So we had a decrease in local production, which is sort of a really great victory for a lot of people. That being said, we are still seeing labs, and in fact, the last probably 4 years consecutively, we have seen a rise in the number of our local meth labs. When I say local, I mean statewide. Not only in the central Wisconsin area, but the western part of the state, eastern part of the state, and all over Wisconsin. We are seeing more frequent lab incidents as we proceed forward in years. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which we can discuss if the questions come up. One of the things that's led to the sort of new lab surge is this manufacturing method, which several years ago somebody referred to as new. Really isn't that new, it's been around for a long time. It's called the one-pot cook or one-pot method. And I'm going to show you some videos on that just because I like to end with stuff starting on fire and blowing up because that's kind of exciting. It wakes you up a little bit for Dan. As we have a level of use in our societies and our locally produced methamphetamine becomes less available, it drives the methamphetamine market from outside of the area, namely outside of the country. So we've seen an increase in imported methamphetamine. Initially back then, back in the mid-2000s, early 2000s, but really into the mid-2000s, there was this perception and idea that the imported meth was much more pure than our locally manufactured meth. You've probably heard methamphetamine meth referred to as ice, and the misnomer is that ice is a pure methamphetamine. Not true. I could go into exactly how it's manufactured and how the Mexican control or the Mexican drug trafficking organizations or DTOs are making meth. They're actually diluting it prior to making it crystalline form, which results in a crystalline form that is diluted methamphetamine. So there's no longer the perception that crystal meth is like ultra pure or more pure than what Joe, Jim, Bob, up the block or just north of us in Lincoln County could manufacture on their own. Okay? They could make a very high grade, relatively pure meth that could be more so than what we're seeing out of Mexico. As far as the out of the country influence, it is just like any other drug that's coming into the U.S. from outside, whether it's cocaine or heroin or high grade marijuana, which although now that's all coming from Colorado and California. Or even things like the synthetics that Dan's going to talk about that are getting imported via the internet from China, etc. We are seeing expanding markets as a drug trafficking organization that is solely out for the purpose of making money. They operate like any other big business. 10, 15, 20 years ago, when there weren't Walmarts in every little community, Walmart wanted to expand their business. They realized they had to get out into the smaller markets, so they did. Now Walmart has stores all over the place. Drug trafficking organizations are no different. They have quote-unquote business plans, an idea to expand the market, and an idea and a plan to capitalize on addiction and people's tendency for addiction. Specifically within central Wisconsin and most of Wisconsin, as far as the imported methamphetamine, we see a huge Asian gang connection or a huge Asian influence on the trafficking of methamphetamine. That's being trafficked from the Twin Cities and all over the U.S. We are starting to see, as a broad brush across the United States, a major impact from Asian gangs, street gangs in Canada, especially on the East Coast. But also, to say that it's an Asian issue or any other race issue is a complete inaccurate statement. It's really an everybody issue. And even the Asians that are dealing it out of the Twin Cities and bringing it to the central Wisconsin area, they're sourcing it from Mexican drug trafficking organizations in Minneapolis and other locations across the U.S. Sort of broad brush trends. So what does meth look like? It can look like a lot of different things. You see the lower left and upper right powder form. It can be really white, really powdery. It can be chunky. It can almost look wet. It can look like my mom used to make the cookies with the powdered sugar on them. You know, when powdered sugar gets wet and it gets kind of clumpy, it can kind of look like that. It can kind of look like cocaine. It can kind of look like heroin. It can kind of look like a lot of different powdered drugs. The bottom line is, when you look at a drug or something that might be a drug, I don't care how much experience you have, you can have an idea of what it is, but there's no real way to know. So don't just, if you see something, don't just assume it is a certain drug. The other two pictures are crystalline form, and methamphetamine really is the thing that you're going to see if you see a crystalline form. It looks like rock candy or crushed glass. There's also this sort of idea, this misnomer, that the larger the shards of the crystal meth, that the more pure. Completely false. All that has to do with how it is crystallized, because there's a step in the manufacturing where you take the powder form and you put some acetone or another solvent on it, and then you let that dissolve and it crystallizes. And all the size of the shards have to do with is the rate that it crystallizes and evaporates. Nothing else, nothing about purity, nothing. So as you read about all of these things that people say, oh, crystal is pure, crystal is this, the bigger the shards, the better, take all of that stuff with a grain of salt. So methamphetamine, how is it used? Just like any drug out there, any pathway into your body, you can use it. You can smoke it, inject it, eat it orally, or, as I said, any other pathway into the body. Rectally, under the tongue, into the eye, it doesn't matter. If there's a way you can get it into your bloodstream, where it can be absorbed into your bloodstream, you can use it. And of course there are, and everybody probably here knows, the easiest, fastest, best highs come from injecting or smoking, because it's the fastest route into the bloodstream. Other ways will get you high with methamphetamine. If you take it orally, you get a high. You don't just get that major super euphoric spike. General effects. I'll talk more about this, but I'm not going to hammer on this. Most of the people in the room are probably pretty familiar with these, probably more so than I. It's a stimulant, so central nervous system type increased stuff, hyperactivity, wakefulness, loss of appetite, tremor, shaking, dry mouth, teeth grinding, you know, the bruxism that goes with it. You talk all about that. I can show you all sorts of pictures of meth mouth and all that. We just don't have the time today. Other things, confusion, hallucinations, panic, aggressiveness. We talk about methamphetamine users being unpredictable and violent and paranoid and freaked out that everybody is either the police or everybody is the bad guys trying to get them. When we start to talk about this, and then you start to hear what Dan talks about, the effects of bath salts on people, you're going to see a lot of similarities of hallucinations and the freakish behavior. And I can tell you a story about a meth user who had meth bugs in his hair so bad that he shaved his head in order to get at them, because it was sort of tingling his nerve centers, and it was his paranoia and his hallucinations. He was imagining that there's bugs crawling out of his hair, so he shaved his head and that didn't work. So he took a screwdriver and peeled back his scalp, and that didn't work, so he poured gasoline on himself in order to get away from meth bugs. You could say that's a meth user, or you could say that the guy freaked out so much that he ate the face off of somebody else, and that could be a bath salts user. I mean, these freakishly hallucinated, paranoia, bizarre things. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, seizures, heavy meth users. Again, this is sort of short-term stuff. We kind of hit on this stuff already. Increased body temperature, increased sex drive initially, but then eventually heavy meth users tend to have less ability to complete the act. What that means is they have to go to greater and greater lengths in order to gain sexual satisfaction. So we often joke at meth labs where it's not a meth search warrant until you find the Mountain Dew and the porn, because inherently these people will go to greater and greater lengths, and this has led to a lot of thoughts and aspects in regards to sexual abuse of children. And the Drug Endangered Children program is not just about the hazards from the chemicals and stuff, it's about the environment and the people who are present and that come and go at all hours. So there's a lot of information out there about this. So you use methamphetamine, especially if you smoke it or you inject it, you get this major binge, major high, just fantastic, you feel great. If you ever talk to a meth user, some of you probably have stories about it, they feel attractive, they feel intelligent, they feel energized, they can do anything and everything, they're the best, they can accomplish all, right? They start to binge through this. They'll continue to use 3 to 15 days. That's just a sort of a random thing. Don't take this graphic as gospel. It affects people very, very differently. Whenever we talk to people, whenever I talk to meth users, I always ask them, what's the longest you've ever been awake? And realistically, the universal answer, like the average that falls out, is 5 days, where somebody's been awake for 5 days. Talked to one guy that told me he was awake for 30 days straight. He was awake for a month straight. I asked him, I said, you mean you were like awake, but then you'd sort of crash and you'd sleep just because you were exhausted? And he said, no, I was awake for 30 days. Now, I don't know if that's the fact, but I know that's what he believes. And I find it difficult to believe. I've been awake for 40-some hours straight, pounding Mountain Dew and working long hours surveillance. And you get goofy, you start to, your mood swings, you get tired, then you're awake and all this. Throw methamphetamine on top of that equation and just imagine, right? So you start to come down, your body starts to fail, you can't get the drug, you start tweaking. In law enforcement, we sort of generically term these people tweakers. They're drug seekers, they're looking for their next high, and this is a situation where they're starting to come off the drug, they're getting more paranoid, they're getting more anxious, and now you have a situation where if you encounter that person, they're more unpredictable. We often refer to handle these folks like an EDP, where you don't want to talk too fast, you don't want to encroach on their space, you don't want to hide your hands, you don't shine your light in their eyes. Just you handle them with kid gloves so you can talk through the conflict with them. That's how we sort of approach it from a law enforcement standpoint. Then you got the crash. And the crash is an interesting phase, and I can tell you stories about going to talk to people where they're nearly unconscious, where we encountered a guy, long story short, ended up having to go into his house to do sort of a check persons type thing, and I was this close to him while he was laying in his bed. We'd been pounding on the door and pounding the wall, it didn't move. And I was this close to him, yelling his name, and he didn't wake up. I had to reach down and grab onto him in order to wake him up. And when he did, he just kind of like groggily opened, oh, hey, how's it going? And there's 3 cops with guns drawn standing in his bedroom, and he's not even surprised about it. Okay? He was in a crash stage. And this is a really telling thing when we start talking about endangerment of children. We have the story of a woman who had like a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and she was going to go on a meth binge, but she knew that she was going to crash, so she locked them in the bathroom so that they'd be okay, they'd be fine, that she'd know where they were, they couldn't get out, and she has her binge, she crashes, and when she wakes up a couple days later, and they're still just locked in the bathroom. So the crash phase is a major, major component of how we look at children that come out of this environment. And then you come out of this normal, I say normal as quote unquote. All the research, and I haven't read a lot of the most recent stuff, disregard this withdrawal. Withdrawal as far as methamphetamine use can be 9 months to a year before your body actually starts to re-regulate the dopamine, the production of dopamine, and what your body is doing on its own that got completely depleted from the heavy meth use. More stuff, insomnia, irritability, stomach doors, weight loss. We talk about the people where their clothes are just hanging off. They've lost 50, 100 pounds. Their eyes are sunken into their skulls. They just don't take care of themselves. They sweat. It drives your body temperature up. You're not bathing properly. You're not brushing your teeth because all you're thinking about is using meth. And this is heavy users. I'm not talking about a quote-unquote casual user, although I haven't encountered a lot of casual users of methamphetamine. They tend to be casual the first time, and from there on, they're pretty well addicted and into it. So they're not taking care of themselves, so they start to smell. They're not eating right. They're using Mountain Dew. Mountain Dew is sort of the universal thing. I joked about it. But in the interim, they want to have a caffeine high. So the energy drinks are Mountain Dew, lots of sugar. Methamphetamine is a vasoconstrictor, so it restricts the blood flow to your teeth. There's only one way in, one way out. So now your teeth start to rot and die. If you know any dentists in the area, ask them about the meth mouth they've encountered. They'll all have seen it or read about it in the ADA journals and stuff. Scars and open sores, the crank bugs, where they're sweating and they start to imagine and hallucinate bugs coming out of their skin and they're scratching and picking and bleeding. So dopamine. Talk real quickly about dopamine. I think this is fascinating stuff, even for just a dumb narc. Dopamine regulates the pleasure in our body. So they did some studies that I think are really interesting. And this is a statement that I'm really suspect when I hear blanket statements like this. The brains of people addicted to methamphetamine are different than those of non-addicts. I'm like, okay, that's a pretty extreme thing. Well, I'm going to show you why that is. Dopamine, neurotransmitter, produced naturally, does a couple of different things. One of the things is movement. So as I walk across, and I can walk smoothly across the room, dopamine plays a role in that. The reason that that is sort of critical is that if you start to look at Parkinson's patients, they have a decreased dopamine level in their bodies, and they have that staggering movement. They can't move smoothly, right? Cognition and frontal cortex function. So this is the flow of information, the reasoning, the learning, and this is what has impacted the treatment and long-term treatment of methamphetamine users. Is this is messed up in them. So they don't function the same way, they don't reason, they almost have to learn differently because of that. Okay, memory, attention, problem solving, all those things are heavily impacted by this reduction of dopamine. And lastly, pleasure and motivation. So let's talk about a little bit about why meth is so addicting. So a group of scientists took some rats, and they started off with a baseline of 100. It doesn't matter what it stands for. 100 is the level of dopamine in the brain of these rats. And so they starve the little rats for a little while, and then they feed them, and they notice that the dopamine level jumps up to 150 and then slowly tapers off. Well, the easiest way to think about this is think about Thanksgiving, where you're really hungry and you're going to sit down and, oh man, you got all the turkey and the stuffing and everything. And you eat just a pile of food, right? And at the end, man, that was really good. You feel comfort. You feel satisfied, right? That's dopamine. Makes you feel good. So these rats, they feel really good. So now they take those little rats and they deprive them of sex for a period of time, and then they let the rats have sex, and the dopamine levels jump up above what they do when they get fed. Makes sense, right? Pretty logical. No nicotine, they give the little rats nicotine, and it jumps up higher than the level of sex. I always think this is maybe where the insight of after you have sex, you know, they picture people smoking cigarettes. Maybe you want to sustain that level, I mean, subconsciously, you want to sustain that level of dopamine in the mind and the brain and the body, so you do something that, again, pumps the body full of dopamine, so you smoke. Then we start looking at some other drugs. Morphine, the different lines represent different levels of morphine, but we're just going to concentrate on the fact that they jump up around 200. Then we talk about cocaine, and cocaine jumps up over 300 of dopamine, that's the DA, that's the tan line. Amphetamine, like White Cross, the amphetamine of old, jumps up to over, about 1,000. And methamphetamine, about 1,150 or 1,200. So what this tells me is that the brain and body were not made to basically experience the level of quote-unquote pleasure that methamphetamine stimulates in the body. And once you experience 1,200, what good is 100 or 200 or 400? It's not as good, it's not as pleasurable, it doesn't drive you like this does. I think this is a great way just to think about why it is that methamphetamine is so addictive. And they could probably do this study with bath salts, with a lot of other stuff, but this is, I think, critical when we analyze that statement of the brains of people addicted to methamphetamine are different than those of non-addicts. Little graphic that shows dopamine depletion. The red, this is normal, sort of control. The red is the level of dopamine. This is methamphetamine. This is a Parkinson's disease patient. So you see that we start to move down, and when you have somebody that's been on methamphetamine for a really long time and a heavy user, you might start to get things like an imbalance, jerky movements, all the mental dysfunctions. So as we age, we naturally lose dopamine in our body. Throw a whole bunch, let's say 2 years of heavy meth use into that, and you deplete 40 years worth of dopamine. When this happens, you go cold turkey, and I think I have a couple of different slides on here. You go cold turkey and you stop, up to 9 to 12 months can go by, and your body is still not back to producing dopamine the way it did before you started your methamphetamine use. So the impact is super long term when you look at how long it takes the body to kind of come back. So what are we talking about? 6 to 12 months. Depression, insomnia, psychosis, paranoia, permanent brain changes. This here, after 6 months, Still a 25 to 80% reduction in dopamine in the body. So long-term stuff. Meth in our communities. I don't know how long I've been talking, but I'll fly through it. Are we still good, Dan? All right. So we talked about it can be imported or it can be manufactured. I'm going to talk about manufacturing of it real quick. And I promised you some videos. And I'm going to just touch on one method of manufacturing. We are seeing methamphetamine manufactured the old-fashioned way, well, I won't say the old-fashioned way. The way that was most popular in central Wisconsin, we call it the Nazi method. It's actually the lithium metal and hydrous ammonia method. We've seen that. We've seen red pea, red phosphorus. And I have another slide that's going to talk about these. We've seen one pot. We've seen almost all of it. But the predominant one that we're seeing is this one pot method that we'll talk about. The thing with manufactured is ingredients are obtained locally. So you have people that were stealing or buying other ingredients. It's manufactured in places all over the place that impact that. So 2 common recipes. These are sort of the parent recipes. The red phosphorus method, which the primary sort of different ingredients are red pea and iodine. I'm not going to go through the process in detail. And then the one that we see most often or had up to this point is the Nazi method, or the ammonium lithium reduction, also called birch reduction or method. And underneath each of these are ones called volcano meth, and that's pretty much being seen on the east coast of the United States. It's sort of a subset of the red pea method. And then the one pot method, which is what we're going to talk about. And all of them have as the sort of common element the use of ephedrine or pseudoephedrine as that primary precursor. So this is really what brought meth to the forefront, is we know everybody in this community who has a vested interest or a vested sense in our community's drug problems. We all know that meth, cocaine, heroin, all the drugs, name the drug, doesn't matter, has a huge impact. But people outside of our mindset don't think about it like we think about it. And what that does is when people in our mindset come forward and we say, we really need to address this, a lot of the rest of the community say, well, why? What's the problem? Well, meth changed that dynamic. How did it change it? Because all of a sudden you had hotels, motels, apartments, residences, self-storage facilities being impacted by people cooking meth in their businesses. Yeah, people could, deal meth or deal drugs in their business, but all they do is eject them, they kick them out, and then the problem's solved, right? But now you've got people who are contaminating their businesses and their establishments. Or you have loss prevention people from people going and stealing pseudoephedrine or stealing ingredients, now encountering violent, paranoid meth addicts, and they're impacted. You have landlords, landlord associations, housing authority, housing administration. Anybody and everybody was impacted by the local manufacturer of meth, and it really brought it to the forefront, and there was this huge response. I say, a little tongue-in-cheek, it's too bad that every drug problem couldn't impact all of society in such a more open fashion, because it would garner a much broader response from everybody else. Okay? But meth did that. Anywhere and everywhere, you saw meth production impacted all sorts of private businesses and other organizations and things that normally don't see it except for, a drug dealer, quote unquote. So that's where we see meth, any place. In fact, we see it along transportation routes and inside vehicles. I'm going to show you some videos of the one-pot method. Down in Tennessee, they call it ditch meth, because you can take all the ingredients, you mix them into a container that might be like this water bottle. You drive down the road, you throw it into the ditch, and you come back 45 minutes later. And if it hasn't exploded, it's done cooking. You collect it, and your meth is done. You just have to do a couple more steps, and now you're on to having methamphetamine. You don't even have to be present to manufacture it. You shake it up, throw it into the ditch, come back 45 minutes later. If it's still intact, you pick it up, and then you finish the process. Anywhere and everywhere. Primary precursor, we already talked about this. I'm going to jump right to one pot. So one pot is really the hot topic of today when we talk about manufacturing methamphetamine. It's increasing. It's the most common way we see people manufacturing meth in Wisconsin. although we still have some people that have manufactured it the Nazi method or the red pea method. In fact, this year I think we've had 3 red pea labs in the state, which is kind of a bizarre, unheard of thing. We've had roughly 30 or so lab incidences where law enforcement has to respond, whether it's a dump site or a meth lab. So we still have them around. They're still occurring, and we have to be well aware of it. When people were unable to get a lot of pseudoephedrine, and they just got a little bit of pseudoephedrine, their reaction vessels and all of the other required material reduced. If you think of making chocolate chip cookies, and you compare chocolate chips to pseudoephedrine, you need chocolate chips to make chocolate chip cookies, right? If you can get a whole bunch of chocolate chips, you can use a really big bowl to make your batch of chocolate chip cookies. But if you can only get a small portion of chocolate chips, you don't need a big bowl, you can do it in a really small reaction vessel. So if you can't get a lot of pseudoephedrine, you don't need to make or use ingredients to make an ounce or an ounce and a half of meth at one time. You only have to make 2 or 3 grams. You're only making it for yourself and one other person or 2 other people so you can get high, and then you're going to go and do it again the next day and again the next day. You're not making it in big batches, you're making it in small batches. So small bottles, less mess, somewhat contained, but extremely volatile. So these are the ingredients: pseudoephedrine, sodium hydroxide, lithium batteries, ammonium nitrate and sulfite, and water. I can tell you about the hazards of each one of these individually, but just bear in mind, there's also some other things that go in here. There's ether or some sort of solvent, which is flammable. You've got water and lithium. Lithium metals can start on fire in the face of moisture, and then you combine that with having ether, you get explosions, which I'm going to kind of show you here in a second, if they work. So those are the ingredients. I'm going to let this play just to sort of give you an overview. And this has been modified so it doesn't talk about everything that's being added. But I want you to kind of see the idea. And I didn't put a whole bunch of pictures in here, and we're not going to talk about this in detail just because of time and it's not necessarily appropriate. But so a reaction vessel can be something like this 2-liter plastic soda bottle. Now, as I talk about this, I want you to realize that when you start to see what this gentleman here, which is the state of Washington crime lab chemist in a chem lab does, and then I'm going to show you some of the other pictures, you're going to realize this guy, although he's a professional, kind of had a screw loose when he was doing this. Okay? And this is pretty early on. So he's going to mix all these ingredients, and the good part doesn't come for a little bit now. So he's going to mix all the dry ingredients in this bottle. If anybody has any questions, I can take questions now, or I know Melissa sort of wanted to hold them for a while, but if you have questions, I can try to respond and answer as we go through. Yes, ma'am?
Doesn't the meth last for a while? I mean, why would you make a little each day? Couldn't you make a bigger batch and save it from day to day?
You could, except that you can't get a lot of pseudoephedrine because they restrict how much you can buy, and you really draw red flags to yourself if you and your 5 friends drive out and you each buy your meth or your pseudoephedrine at this location, another location, another location. Although they're doing that, you still can't get as much as you used to be able to before you had to show your ID. I mean, literally, somebody would go into Walmart and steal the entire shelf full of Sudafed back in, before it was controlled, before it was where you had to sign for it. So although you could manufacture it if you got a whole bunch of pseudoephedrine, absolutely, that'd be the way to go. That'd be the smart thing to do. But they just can't get that much pseudoephedrine on the front end. So now what he's doing, when you peel open a lithium battery, you can peel the lithium out of it, and he's putting it in here. All that liquid in there, that's ether, by the way. That's starting fluid. And if you know anything about ether, if you had an ignition source, ether goes boom quite readily, and is a cause of, or the sort of instigator of a lot of fires and explosions in meth labs. So those little black strips, that's lithium metal out of lithium batteries. And as I said, lithium can start on fire in the presence of moisture or water. So much so that if you peel a lithium battery and you have the lithium and you breathe on it, you sneeze on it, it's humid, you crush a little bit, you can have a fire. It doesn't like blow up, but if you have a fire, a source of ignition, in the presence of that much ether, it can be a major problem. So this is the fun part. So now he adds water. And now you start to get a little bit of bubbling, and now the video kind of gets exciting. This is what they call rolling, when the reaction starts to get rolling. Watch, he shakes it up. Now watch as he tries to take that lid off. Oh, it's a little tight. Oh, there, he gets it off. Now it starts to roll. Now you'll start to see some flashing in here. That's the lithium igniting. As you see the lithium ignite, realize that lithium burns at 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. Continues to roll, continues to roll. And to get that reaction, now what's happening is the ingredients are reacting with each other. Methamphetamine is being manufactured in that container, and then eventually what happens is that methamphetamine gets isolated into the ether layer, you extract that, and then you salt it out. That means nothing but, this is just sort of like everything goes on here except the final isolation of the product. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. The interesting thing to remember is that you saw him shake that up, and I want you to sort of remember that. He shook it up, and he went to take that lid off, and you know when pressure builds in a container, it makes it harder to get the top off, and he hit it, okay? Remember him doing that in a laboratory environment, in a 2-liter soda bottle that's really thin plastic, okay? So what we've started to see is that rather than using 2-liter soda bottles, our guys are going to the 32-ounce Gatorade bottles that are heavier plastic. They have a bigger mouth to them so that getting the ingredients in is a lot easier. We've also seen them wrap them in duct tape to maintain more pressure, because pressure is one of the things that is problematic. That pressure can build and the vessel can fail, and then you get kind of an explosion, kind of a fire. We've seen them wrap them in duct tape. We've seen them use glass jars wrapped in duct tape. We've seen now down south, I think it was down south, some guy built a PVC tube with a pressure release valve and a pressure valve so he could screw it on and then make it in there and release the pressure on it. So they're figuring this out. So what happens sometimes is that the lithium, this reaction, 2-liter soda bottle, this reaction is just sitting here, and there's going to be a little piece of lithium right there that's floating down, and it hits the water layer that's in here that's settled down below that solvent. Hit the water layer, sparked at 1200 degrees, burned a hole through the plastic, and now your ether is leaking out and it's on fire. Notice it's not going boom because it's not contained. It's just like if you set gasoline on, well, the fumes of gasoline are what cause a major problem. Was that thing rolling? Was it like churning where you'd walk in and you'd go, hey, this is a meth lab because it's churning? No, it's just sitting there. It could be this bottle with a 1 pot ingredients just sitting there, and all of a sudden a little piece of lithium decides it's going to float down and hit that water layer, and poof, and it starts a fire. 2-liter soda bottle, just like that guy was using. The other thing that happens when you manufacture meth like this is the reaction can kind of become equalized within that vessel. When that happens, you can walk up on it. So now it's not doing much, it's a little bit bubbly. This guy opens it and closes it. That's all he does. Opens it, closes it. Now as you watch this, you'll start to see the sides of this container start to bulge, and the bottom starts to bulge. It's going to overpressure. See, it's misshapen. It overpressurizes and basically deflagrates. Everything catches on fire. The next one that's pretty cool. Remember the chemist. He had a hard time opening that. Shook it up, had a hard time opening it. So a controlled cook by law enforcement for an education. The guy puts the water into the container, the one little 20-ounce soda bottle, screws the cap on, shakes it, goes to take the cap off, drops it. So we can watch that again because it's short. Puts the water in, puts the lid on, shakes it, goes to take the top off of it, but it tips over, and he doesn't get the top off of it up, so it immediately overpressurizes and starts on fire. Moral of the story: if you see anything that looks like a meth lab, do not touch it. You know the audience that is most difficult to get this through to? Cops.
We want to touch it, we want to smell it.
Right! Hey, this is cool, what is this? Okay. So that's meth. I apologize, probably went a little bit over Dan's time. questions now, or we can wait till after. I'm going to hang out until Dan is done. I'm going to listen to him talk, and we can address it then. Anything immediately? All right, Danny, you're up.
Well, it's good to see everybody. I appreciate inviting me over to talk to you a little bit. I recognize a lot of faces out in the group. This view's a bunch of new faces too, so it's good to see and meet everybody. I'm going to talk very briefly on this here. I appreciate Ron cutting his presentation short. It was a little bit, his obviously is very long. I appreciate him being gracious enough to cut it short to squeeze me in here at the tail end. I did assure him and Melissa and Bob as well that to move as quickly as I can. I should be able to cover it in at least 2 hours, maybe 2.5, so we'll move really quickly here. So everybody stay with me. We're going to try to make it through about 1 o'clock or so. So our area, my name is Dan. I am from the Langley County Sheriff's Office, which is county seat is in Antigo. In 2006, I was joined into the Nordic Drug Enforcement Task Force. Basically what that means is we're a group of about 7 counties and 22 municipalities, state, federal, local workers that pool together resources, money, equipment, and everything else to try to effectively make our jobs easier. The one thing that's important about that, or even worth mentioning, is that since that time I've had a unique opportunity to be assigned to special things, such as undercover operations, and where I'm using with people who are using, and you work to effectively get controlled buys on narcotics. We try to purchase them in a controlled setting. I was assigned for a short amount of time to a motorcycle gang where for 3 months that's all I did was about 2 years in advance of it. I didn't cut my hair. I dyed it blonde. I pierced everything up. Hit a couple tattoo shops and went out on the road and did that. And that was a unique opportunity. That was the most beneficial part of my drug assignment so far because it afforded me an opportunity to see people before they used, while they were using, and after they used. So in the course of that 3 months, although it was a short assignment, I saw just about every single controlled substance purchased, used, in the after effects of it. And why that's important is because I could observe, just like many of you, I know some of the name tags in the agencies or places that you represent. You probably have had the same opportunities. You'll know how somebody under the influence of marijuana acts. You know how somebody under the influence of cocaine acts, methamphetamine, and such. Because you see it, you're exposed to it. You deal with them all the time. You probably know them before they use it, while they're using. You're going to see that reaction. With the bath salts, and why it's worth mentioning in the presentation is that it is such a unique user reaction that people are going to suffer once they initially use the bath salts. It's unlike any of the drugs that you've seen. It's unlike any of the people that you've ever seen or been exposed to. It's just it's an amazing reaction. I do have a couple of videos. We'll try to get through it and just kind of explain it a little bit better. There are so many synthetic drugs out there now, and most people in the room are probably fairly familiar with it, again, based upon their assignments that I can see. But it's really, from my opinion, that's where the whole world is shifting to, especially in our neck of the woods here. It's kind of moved away a little bit from the regular drugs, and we're now into the designer synthetic drugs. It's pretty much 99% of what we deal with in our jurisdiction. Again, being from Antigo, if anybody has been following the news or reading the newspapers, every single day there's at least 1, 2, sometimes as many as 3 or 4 articles on the bath salt. People are being arrested for it, the freakish things that are happening while they're on it. The police blotter is full of all kinds of different instances that draws public's attention because it's so bizarre. It's just so unusual, it's so different. So people are, and they wonder why. They wonder why that's all happening and everything. But for the purpose of this presentation, we'll stick very closely to the bath salts and synthetic drugs. We're going to skip over a lot of the wordy slides just to purposely to save time here. Bath salts can come in a variety of different packages, as does the synthetic cannabinoids, or like the fake marijuana. Here's a couple examples of it. I'm supposed to use my laser. This container here is one of the more popular containers. I would estimate that a container of that sort, maybe the color changes, the size of it changes, but a container of that sort is probably recovered in at least more than half of our bath salt arrests. And we're probably averaging 3 or 4 bath salt arrests a day for all week long. So that's a very popular container. I do have 2 examples of them here that I'm going to send around. And for whatever reason, you'll notice the purple one, it's fine print, but if you can read in the back of it, it does say not for human consumption, and it lists some of the chemicals that it does not contain. But the front of the package appears to be a scratch remover. It's called ice scratch remover. So you see it doesn't say anything on there about being a bath salt. It doesn't say anything on there about a fake marijuana or synthetic cannabinoid. It just says scratch remover, not for human consumption. So pay attention to that. The red container here is labelless. It doesn't have one, but it's a good example of that. More often now, what people are doing, because the drugs are so easily available on the internet, people are buying in mass quantity is what's basically happening. And then they break it down. Lots of people are cutting it with various different substances to try to maximize their profit as they sell the bath salt. And in this container, I have a few examples of that. These are some jewel bag type things. And jewel bags are these little tiny Ziploc bags, 1 inch by 1 inch bags. be used to distribute just about any kind of drug, but in this particular instance, a lot of them are using this for the bath salt. Then the other side of the package here is a foilie, much like the foil here, I would assume. It's one of the methods of ingestion of the bath salts, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. So I'll pass those around, and at the end, if anybody has any questions, we can address those then. A couple of little pipes, it's some usage type things up here. Here's a bottle that they're using most likely in conjunction with the foil. As they're smoking it off the foil, they use the bottle to hold over the vapors and ingest it a little more. This is a package of synthetic cannabinoids here. This is a fake THC or fake marijuana. Here's some bath salt containers, things like that. If you have a parent or you're a teacher or you have a child or something at home, you may not notice some of those things. They're pretty innocuous looking. They're colorful, they're bright. It doesn't say anything on them about being drugs. It doesn't say anything about how hazardous they are, and it won't say anything about how it's going to cause some of the reaction that we're going to see here. Here's some synthetic cannabinoids, these flat packages here. Bath salts are on top. You can kind of get the idea, again, with the type of packaging that's on them there. When I do these presentations, I do them all over the place. I do them for law enforcement. I do them for teachers, bus drivers, just about anybody that listens to me, I'll talk to. And I always get a question at the end of it from law enforcement especially, is they'll say, I'm sorry for my ignorance. I didn't know that bath salts were, I thought them guys were running up to Walmart and getting that stuff and coming back down and smoking it. I feel like an idiot. So well, don't feel like an idiot because you hear it a lot. Because if you're not paying attention or you're not really watching what's happening, you can see that. So for the purpose of the presentation here, synthetic bath salts are meant to alter the central nervous system. In no way, shape, or form are they meant to escape, unwind, or be luxurious in any way, shape, or form. Not at all. And two different things. At the price of bath salts, you would hardly take nowadays between $80 and $100 for the gram. You wouldn't be dumping it in your bath. It's a tiny little Ziploc bag like that. It's not going to do anything for you. So that's one thing to dispel on that. I do have a video here. This particular user is actually alleged to have overdosed on synthetic THC. But it's a great demonstration for the bath salt user because it kind of mirrors the same reaction that you have. In that undercover setting I was talking about before, you see, at least it's been my experience to see, depending on the person, what they're using and everything, they're going to have one of two reactions. They'll always have them in conjunction. First will be the manic mood swings where they're up and down in their moods. They'll be high and they'll be low. They'll start off where 1 minute they're shaking your hand and thank you, Investigator Bowden, for coming here and arresting all of my friends and doing a search warrant. This has been really great. I appreciate that. Take us all to jail. This is fun. And the next thing you know, they'll snap. They're combative. They're vulgar. They're biting. They're spitting. And the fight is on. Then you'll snap their fingers and you'll be right back to the thing where thank you guys. You're not bad guys. And it's this cycle that continues over and over again. This manic ride that they're on. So this is kind of a good example of that. It kind of goes and illustrates. Everyone hear that? Okay. It's the copy of the 911 tape. Maybe some of you have seen this here out on the internet. They're showing some packaging here of these are synthetic cannabinoids. You'll note the package, how it appears. Doesn't say anything on this one. It says bubblegum potpourri on the bottom there. On the back, the packages will usually say not for human consumption. They do list certain chemicals that are not in there. In this particular call, this 911 call, the first part where he's screaming and hollering, then he hung up the phone. The second part is the law enforcement trying to call him back. He's not answering the phone because he's clearing out all of the contents of his apartment from a second-story apartment onto the street. So he's in there throwing everything out the second-story window. When law enforcement arrives, they find the gentleman, take him into custody. They've got him in the back of the squad car, and that's what you're about to see here. And then they're trying to talk to him, and this is typical of the reaction that you're going to see is something like this. see his change in reaction there. Now all of a sudden he's becoming scared, he's agitated. He's not laughing, it's not funny anymore to him. It's a good illustration of how that works. You know, he was laughing, he was scared, he was laughing, he was scared. You kind of see that ride over and over again. It can last for several hours, and it makes it very difficult from law enforcement standpoint, from like a first responder or medical standpoint, to try to get necessary information from someone when they're in that state of mind. From the medical people that I've showed the video to or that have attended presentations, they said that most likely he's having some sort of a dopamine reaction or just dopamine overload or something that's causing him more or less to kind of short circuit. Those same people, Ron had some real good slides there and will allow me to kind of piggyback on that and skip through some of my dopamine things here. As far as with that dopamine in his brain, he's probably just overloaded with it. So what are bath salts? We've kind of covered this already. They're not your traditional bath salts. They're rather a central nervous system stimulant. They're marketed as bath salt or plant food, and that's the big thing. That's where they've attached their name to as a marketing thing, to avoid DEA detection. Now, if you were here in Wisconsin and you were attempting to obtain bath salt somewhere, you're going to have no problem doing that. If you try to get something called plant food, you're not going to have as much luck. Now, if you go out in the western states and you try to find bath salts, you're not going to be able to find them, but you're going to be able to find plant food. It's just a different way geographically how they try to avoid detection there. There's a list of chemicals, some banned substances here. MDPV is one of them, mephedrone, and methylone. Those are some of the 4-MEC or 4-MMC, kind of the same substance. But those are some of the compounds that you'll see in relation to most of the synthetic drugs, which are just a concoction of words that look just like the MDP word here. I'm not even going to attempt to say it. Sometimes, every now and again, I have heard somebody that can say it, but that's not going to be, and I'm not going to make a fool of myself trying. So here's some examples of the packaging. You can see who they're marketing this stuff to here. I mean, this package on the bottom here, again, if you're a teacher or a parent or you're exposed to kids, you probably see that trademark at least on a daily basis with the Monster Energy thing. It's very popular with the kids, just energy drinks that are marketed and advertised all over. These are packages of synthetic cannabinoids, synthetic marijuana. Interesting study here done by the DEA on this Mr. Nice Guy. They randomly, it seems to be very popular, where they're getting different samples from all over the United States, where they're testing from the East Coast, West Coast, Central. They're all over the place. And the DEA laboratories, when they run the test on this stuff, notice that it's never the same concoction. It's never been the same thing twice. It's always different as it comes across. So even the stuff that you're buying from the manufacturer that's coming over in that package isn't the same as what the last package we had was. And that's causing some of the problems, and that's causing what we're seeing in some different reactions and how reactions are kind of changing and evolving as time goes by. Here's another example of that. This is a research chemical type package. Here again is the name on the top there. You can see that that's what somebody's going to snort or smoke or inject into their body. And there's the breakdown on it. You can see the samples, 1 gram. If you'll notice, and this is my opinion, and maybe Ron would, having seen some stuff, would concur that this stuff seems, when you see a gram of meth or you see a gram of cocaine or any type of powder drug, those types of drugs always look smaller to me. When you see a gram of bath salts, it always appears to be more than it is. It must be a very, very light substance, because to get a gram, it takes quite a bit of it. Characteristics of bath salts, they're powder or crystal form. It crumbles very easily. I always describe it like a sugar jar that you might see where you have some moisture in there and it looks like a peas in there. You try to grab it and it crumbles in your hands. That's kind of what it reminds me of when I've seen it. It's white to light brown in color. However, there are so many variations now on the internet. There's so many different things, and there's so many things it's getting mixed with that a lot of times that can vary as well. Sometimes it can be pastel colored, pastel pink, like on the bottom there. If you can see, it's not really color washed there. Some of the stuff smells like strawberry. I mean, there's always this, they're trying to allure, again, the teenage people with that. Slight odor of feet is something that's kind of interesting. When you spend a lot of time with these guys, I'll always ask them, like, what does it smell like? When somebody's using it, what does it smell like? And everybody will tell you, you get a random sample. It smells like old gym socks, smells like dirty feet, wet shoes, and everything. It always seems to have that nexus about the wet feet thing. And then if you're around someone who uses it, or you are around paraphernalia after they've used it, it has exactly that same smell. Once you smell that, it's a very bad smell, and you'll never forget it, because it's one of those types of odors. Well, most of the packaging, in fact, all the packaging is labeled not for human consumption. One of the things that's interesting about that is that that's actually a defense mechanism that has worked before in court, where they'll say that my client, it's said on there not to ingest it, and they ingested it, they can't be held liable for their actions. So it's kind of an interesting thing. And then it is very available through the internet. That is one of the major sources for distribution is through the internet. And what's interesting about that is we receive now a lot of complaints, more than you think, because if there's a spoof site set up, where what they'll do is for 24 hours they'll post a site for bath salt sales, and they'll sell and make all these credit card transactions, they'll crash the site and they'll disappear. And then people will come into the sheriff's office to file a complaint at our front window and say, I tried to buy all these bath salts, they took $367 from me and I don't have any bath salts. I want something done about it. Which is kind of unique because it's like, are you listening to yourself? You tried to buy drugs on the internet and come to your mailbox and you got ripped off and now you're mad at it, So it's interesting, but that's another thing. It's a entrepreneur world, these guys are looking for different ways to make money, and that's another one. They know that there's a bath salt problem, people are doing it, they know that they're addicted, they know that there's people trying to make a lot of money, so they set up things to try to take advantage of that. Here's some examples of packaging. It is produced mainly in China, in Southeast Asian countries, over in that realm of the world. So you do see every now and again, you will see some stuff with the kind of Chinese writing on there. So the effects of bath salts, much like Ron mentioned, if my presentation and a lot of slides will mirror a lot of the things that Ron had mentioned to you, so it's going to make it easy for me to kind of skip over some of that because the symptoms mirror each other almost identically. Just like what Ron might have mentioned. The one thing that's different, or the reason that could possibly be, is that it's kind of a mixture of cocaine, methamphetamine, MDA, and LSD kind of all rolled in one. You kind of have the effects of all of that, all into one drug. The initial euphoria that I mentioned before lasts that 3 to 4 hours. That's when they're on that high, when it's the greatest high, like what Ron's his PowerPoints. I would be interested in seeing a bath salt slide, like the information there, just to see where exactly that dopamine level is on a bath salt compared to methamphetamine, compared to a lot of that, because my guess is it's going to be at the level of where methamphetamine is or higher, I would think, just based upon the chemical concoction there. Then something sort of interesting happens to you, where the psychosis and the suicidal and homicidal thoughts kind of start to happen. We have so many examples that I could tell you about. I'll just kind of skip over and tell you some of the ones. So the perception is reality to the people when they're having their hallucinations. About a month ago or so, we responded to a call of a man in a bank. He walks into a bank, and the guy is disheveled. He hasn't slept in about 8 days or so. What law enforcement didn't know is prior to going there, he thought that people were invading his house, so he shot up his house inside, ran out of ammunition, threw the gun in his front porch and took off running. He ran the entire distance across town, gets to the downtown area and thinks that the snipers are up on the roof and they're going to shoot him. So he runs into the bank and throws the teller a note. That makes no more sense. And she says, call 911, they're going to kill me. So the tellers hit the panic buttons. They think the guy's going to pull something else. I mean, he's just completely out of control. It took 3 officers. One of them was me. I know it's hard to believe that my overbearing physical size, that I couldn't contain him myself, but I didn't. That's actually been alleged in court. That's actually where an attorney's actually alleged that my overbearing physical presence intimidated someone so much one time. So you know that that's not true. But anyway, so we're wrestling with this guy in the lobby, and we get him in custody. And what I relate this to is the man fought for basically a cause and a purpose. I mean, he truly believed that when he got outside that bank, they were going to kill him, and he fought like he was. He wasn't just going to, oh, you guys got me, gigs up, this drug thing is just, I'm high and I'm going to go. His perception, reality was to him is that the minute I step outside, they're going to kill me. So he fought like that. And when we got him to the door, he did not want to come out. And I've been dealing with this man for 14 years. I know he's been doing and dabbling in a little bit of everything over those 14 years. So I've seen him and how he acts all that time. And this is completely uncharacteristic of him. And when he got outside into that car, he was absolutely paralyzed with fear. You could see it almost right through him, the fear in his eyes. I mean, he was just terrified that those guys are going to kill him on that roof. That's one example. Another example we responded to recently was a man that thinks his house is on fire. So he's emptied the entire contents of his home onto the street, and he's running around the house crazed. And when law enforcement interviews him, he takes a bottle of antifreeze and dumps it over his head and thinks that now he's on fire. And that, again, perception is his reality. He thinks that that's true. We had an instance where a man thinks he's being chased by a swarm of killer bees. So, I mean, your heart has to go out to a guy like that, because if he's incarcerated or he gets taken into custody and you put him into a jail cell, he's in a confined cement room, and he still thinks, he can't switch it off and think, oh, the fun's over and now I'm going to go to jail and it's going to stop. He still thinks that while he's in that jail cell, those killer bees are chasing around. And those are just a small sample, and that's what kind of draws some of the public's curiosity, like I mentioned before, is that those examples are in the paper on a daily basis. It's a new case and a new example every day. What's dangerous about that is there are so many examples of the suicide or the homicide. There's no shortage of examples of bath salt cases or exposures because we don't have the time to get into the case study portion of this. If you wanted to research it, you won't have any trouble finding it. There's numerous different things that have happened where people have committed suicide or homicide. Our jail staff right now is under the gun big time. We estimate that as many as 50 of our jail inmates are in there with bath salt related cases. So that really cramps, it leaves our jail with what do we do with these people? You can't put them into general population. You can't move them around and put them anywhere else. And the problem is so many suicide attempts have been happening. So jails, according to their policies and procedures, they have to take that and handle that a little bit differently than what they would a normal person who's incarcerated. So their resources are completely depleted because they have, I think last week they had at least 3 or 4 suicide attempts in the night where the people were very close to being successful. So it creates a big problem. So you could research that. There's a major crash there with the suicidal and homicidal thoughts. The long-term effects remain unknown. Virtually, the drug's only been around since about 2009. There's not a lot of long-term medical data there. The doctors that I spoke to last week with this presentation had been doing some of their own studies because, again, being the doctors that are on the front lines, they were seeing a lot of this stuff. And they said, we would estimate that it takes as much of a third of your life or more away, just based probably a lot on like what Ron's slides were showing you with the amount of dopamine that your body's expending there. So it hasn't been around a long time. What is out there, what is around, some of the new thoughts that are starting to emerge about that, if you do talk to medical professionals, is they say that your brainwaves will mirror or emulate somebody that's schizophrenic. So if you're having the brainwave done, it seems to mirror the same thing, cause the same effect. Oftentimes, pepper sprays and tasers won't work. That's a real problem, again, for law enforcement and medical people, your teachers. If you're anybody that's in a setting where all of a sudden you have to deal with this type of person, sometimes those tools aren't going to work very well, so that you can see where that's a hazard to everybody involved, including the person who's using. With that comes driving, we've had a real rash of that. With the drunk driving thing, it's pretty simple. I mean, we have a group of standardized field sobriety testing where they'll run you through some standardized tests, and if 1 + 1 = 2, then you move on to the next thing, and there's cues and things. It's a giant formula that kind of keeps building. And at the end of that, you have a breath test, and then you do some more testing, and at the end of that, you have a breath, blood, or urine test. And then there's results to that, and then there's benchmarks. So it's very easy to see when someone's impaired, and you can see that. When I used to train new deputies, I would always, because when the new cops would come along, they're always afraid, I don't want to make an arrest if it's not a good arrest. I don't want to arrest the wrong guy. I used to tell them, you're not going to ever make a drunk driving arrest. If you do everything correctly in the way that the system has provided for, at the end of it, they will have to be intoxicated. It's impossible to arrest somebody who's not drunk. But the problem with the bath salts is it creates all of these problems that you've seen, all these things. People driving, we had a guy driving his truck, completely out of control. Over 100 and some miles an hour, he ends up crashing into a lake. He gets out of there and he's running around stripping off all of his clothes. He runs into the house next door, bursts into the house next to this lake, and starts screaming that my body's covered in acid, my body's covered in acid. And these people are randomly sleeping at night, and a naked man busting in their house screaming, but his truck, he crashed his truck. He was driving on that, because he thinks that he's getting chased and the acid's on him. So it causes a real problem. One of the major things that causes such a problem is there is no standardized testing like we told you. If you use bath salt and you think that that's happening to you and you do all these things, that could very well be the end result, but there's no way to tell how much of that is in your system because of lack of ability to test for it. We'll skip through a lot of this stuff here. Ron did a real nice job of covering the dopamine, and I'm going to piggyback on that and save a lot of time here in explaining this stuff with that, and I'm just going to hammer through this next video here. This is the second part of the reaction. This is the psychosis shown on the blue slide where it may last 2 to 14 days. So after someone has an initial euphoria where everything is great, and it's very similar to Ron's meth high where it's just life is wonderful and I can do anything and I am invincible, to then you slip into this psychosis phase where then these hallucinations set in, and this paranoia, the suicidal thoughts, homicidal thoughts, and things like that. This individual, this is off A&E Intervention. If anybody has ever had an opportunity to watch that show, it's usually a pretty factually based show. It's pretty decent. You can log on to the internet and watch the entire. This is just a trailer for this, so it's very short. But it does a real good job illustrating. This young man here has been uses for a very long time, and there's a couple of interesting things here, so we'll watch that. He thinks he sees shadow people. There's people around him. He's trying to show the producer where the shadow people are.
More of the drug in his system makes symptoms get scarier.
flashlight. He's climbing on top, trying to find the phase people. He's made himself a tool to kill them. How he thinks he's going to kill them.
To fight the phase people. He has obsession with building things.
We'll come back to that table in a minute there if you saw that.
But if they hit the top part, they die basically. So they can kill them. If I put it through the heart or the brain. That's scary. How a drug can do that to someone. Well, honey. What are you looking for? What? If you squirt every fraction, it goes away?
I believe he's taking these drugs to avoid his limits control.
Tyler, don't break the tile.
Usually eat pile of bodies, which I guess, oh my god, that's what you want.
The danger this guy poses up on the rooftop looking at a pile of bodies. I mean, there's nothing stopping him from swan diving off the building.
The drug allows him to express what he internalized as a child.
You're 4 years old, and here you are, you're a horrible mother parent. So, you know, put the pressure on me.
It's me and my crazy old son.
Okay, that's a good presentation. That shows the paranoia, and that shows some of the hallucinations and just the state of mind that he's in, and we deal with that. The reason that I showed you that pool table is if I could have had some sort of a camera, or you could have followed me around and done some of these search warrants that we've done, especially in the last couple of months, that's exactly what we see. That table could have come out of any one of our search warrant cases. Recently, at the turn of the year there, right around January 2013, we started seeing people evolving slowly away from the phase tools like this gentleman is doing with his flashlight and the water bottle and everything, and they actually jumped to what we call miniature arms race in our area, where they were breaking into houses and stealing ammunition and guns, and the focus of the burglars was simply only firearms and ammunition. They were bypassing valuables and everything else, and they were just trying to arm themselves. And then for a short time after that, every person we arrested, we would take a loaded handgun off of, or a loaded long gun. And they always had there was always a firearm involved in the drug crime. I'm going to skip these slides for time's sake. Ron did a good job of covering the dopamine, and that's basically it. I just want to touch on the methods of ingestion here real quickly. I've got like 4 or 5 minutes left here. They can snort it, inject it, or smoke it, and some of those are they can use some in combination type things. There's something called hot railing where they'll lay out a track like you see on the mirror right here. You got a nice little line put out there, so they'll take a metal pipe and they'll heat it up and then they'll snort that line. But as the powder passes through the pipe, it'll burn, and then the person will actually blow out smoke like they've inhaled a cigarette. So it's kind of an interesting thing to see. But that is typically it. The injected is the big method in our area. I would estimate from what I've seen, about 90% of our people or so are injecting it. So we have this mad race for the needles, and we have all the problems that seem to come with that. The next preferred method after that would most likely be probably the smoking at one. And snorted it's used, but probably not as frequently as injection. Everybody by us is injecting. We get calls. If I had one of my counterparts from the city PD in here right now, they would tell you that on a daily basis they respond to a paraphernalia charge in a yard where somebody's mowing the yard and they find a handful of discarded needles or something. We keep sharps containers in all of our squads anyhow, but now we're using them. Now they're full all the time. Those are one of those things that used to bounce around in your trunk. You never hardly use them, but now they're full every day. Our patrol guys are picking up paraphernalia on a daily basis. People are just driving around, shooting up and throwing the needles out. In an area by us, we just have a problem with it. When I do these presentations for like the bar association or some of the restaurant type things, I always get asked about the mixed with food and drink portion. That's why I kind of leave it in here. It's my opinion that I don't think that, because it's a concern with them obviously in the food and beverage industry, because they don't want people getting served that stuff or people slipping it in there. But as I mentioned before and showed you that picture of that gram that was up there, how the amount of substances was, I don't believe that a person could take that amount of substance and pour it into like a mixed drink on a bar without it leaving some sort of residue or something that would indicate to somebody that was in there. So I kind of mentioned that here. If you put it in a food or the drink, I don't think it's going to have the same effect. You'll have effect, but you won't have the same effect. So here's a couple of packages, some examples. Again, this is a very, very popular brand in our area, from our area in north up into the Rhineland area, this Ivory Wave. You can see very bright, colorful, innocuous. Nothing on that package will do anything that what I've just been talking to you folks about for the last half hour. The Charlie Sheen one, that might be a clue. You may want to stay away from that. That indicates that's probably not good because it just doesn't look it. You'll notice my slide compared to Ron's slide, a lot of the exact same things that are on there, same type of cause and effect. These are actually meth people here. The reason I put it in the presentation is because this is like a 2-year booking cycle, it's like a 3-year booking cycle. And the reason I put it in here, stole it from the methamphetamine slide, was because we have a small group of people, there's probably about 30 of them or so that are isolated, that are connected, and every time that they use, this is what's happening to them down here. Only in a version of, it's about 2 or 3 times worse than what this gentleman looks like here. They'll get out of jail on Sunday, they'll look fine, you'll have contact with them guaranteed by Saturday. They'll look 3 times worse than that gentleman there, they won't have slept for any of that time. For whatever reason, whether it's mixed with meth and they're suffering the same effects, but it does, the bath salt users are starting to look a lot like our methamphetamine users. Again, these Mirans things, you see a big sleep deprivation, a lot of the same things. Here's the teeth grinding and everything else, same type of things. Here's the different brands. I mean, this slide can go on all day. There's so many different brands out there now, it's amazing. And we don't have time to get through this presentation. I apologize for that, but most people are probably most familiar with the Florida case, right? I mean, the one where the homeless man had his face eaten off. He was on the ground, and law enforcement tasered him 6 times. And from reading what I could read about it, it sounds like they were textbook deployments of the taser, but they weren't effective for what I mentioned before. It doesn't work on somebody who's under the influence of bath salt. So he pulled the probes out, and unfortunately, the man was later shot by law enforcement, shot and killed, to try to save the homeless guy, because the only thing that remains of the homeless guy is he has a goatee, and that's all you can see. The rest of his face has all been eaten off by the other guy under the influence of bath salt. There's 2 major thoughts behind that. At first, when they tested his blood, the first and only thing that came out in the blood test was THC. So you had a big camp of people saying, aha, look it. You know, THC, look at what it made him do. You know, and that was a big thing. But what we could really learn from that is that the tests won't show that. What they were testing for wouldn't have showed up. They couldn't detect bath salts at the time, so it's very probable he was under the influence of a lot of bath salt at the time. That is all the time I have. I apologize. Like I said, this is really truly a 4-hour presentation, so I've skimmed the surface literally, and I've talked pretty quick. I hope I covered all the points of interest to most people, or at least gave you a better thing. I do have some cards. I'll leave them on the corner here. If anybody's interested or has any questions, I'm more than happy to address them. If we don't have time today, give me a call, send me an email. If you ever want to attend one of the full 4-hour or 2-hour presentations, I can make those available to you. So thanks for your time. I apologize. Hope I didn't run over late here.
All the presentations will be available to you. The recording will be available to you as soon as we get it all up. So I just want you to let you know that. So all of these things that we went through quickly, just so the access to that. Is there any questions for Dan or Ron before they leave? Yep, go ahead.
Do they have a test now to find out if it's bath salts or is there still no test?
They do. They have a test now where they can test for up to 4 of the substances. I've heard there's a test out there that can test for as many as 10 to 12. But as of today, the last law enforcement bulletin we got, there's over 7,800 kinds of bath salts that are available on the market now. So let's just say you can test for 12 of them. Maybe we'll stick with the 12. There's that other 7,000 plus substances that we can't test for that exist. So they're clearly behind the ball. It's rolling downhill a lot faster than anybody will ever catch it. You know, the blood tests are the same. They're expensive. In our particular area, all of our bath salt cases involve a drug called PVP, as opposed to the ones I showed you before. You can't test for it. It's not a banned substance. It's worse than really what is out there. So by the time the legislation comes, which I'm understanding there's legislation coming to ban PVP, by the time that happens, it'll already be on to the next thing, and the test won't do any good, and it's just, it changes. They're always changing and tweaking. The chemist will remove one molecule or tweak it or change it, and molecular changes it. It's the same substance, does the same effects, but it's just different. It won't be able to be tested. And synthetic cannabinoids are real popular for that, where they'll just tweak it, the recipe slightly and just slap a new name on it, and they'll send it down the road something else. It's a very good question. It isn't a problem really necessarily coast to coast. It's not even really a problem county to county. I mean, if you talk to my counterparts in Lincoln County, they'll tell you that methamphetamine over there is their drug of choice. So that's what they have the most problems with. Marathon County, they have a plethora of problems, but mostly it's going to be the crack cocaine and some different things. And the higher population produces different groups of cells of drug users. You know, I mean, if you talk to Shawano County, theirs used to be crack, or used to be powdered cocaine, and now very quickly it's quickly becoming bath salt. So you see these different sects, you know, Rock County, real bath salt problem. Brown County becoming a bad problem. You know, so, but where it's very concentrated in areas, or coast to coast, it's a problem, but again, only specifically in certain areas. So it's kind of interesting, and why that happens, I'm not really sure. Can't answer the question as far as if it's economically, you know, depressed type areas where it's more available, more idle time. If you were to go to like Minot, North Dakota, and the boom town out there for their oil mining and everything that's going on, I think they've got a real problem going on out there. So because it's just idle hands, you know, no time, nothing to keep occupied. Any other questions on the bath salt? Good. I answered all the questions that fast. That's a good thing. So, all right. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.